Veyron Station did not spin so much as it breathed, a colossal lung of steel and glass floating in the neutral zone between the inner core and the fringe systems. It was a masterpiece of architectural arrogance, a place where gravity was a luxury subscription and the air smelled of ozone, expensive perfume, and recycled engine coolant. Lyra Voss stepped off the transport shuttle, her heels clicking a sharp, authoritative rhythm on the docking bay floor. The sound was a declaration. She was here. She adjusted the collar of her midnight blue synth silk coat. It was tailored to perfection, designed to highlight her silhouette while concealing the compact sensory scanner stitched into the lining. To the galaxy, Lyra was the disgraced former ambassador of the Terran Coalition, exiled for her naive idealism and forced into the role of a cultural envoy, a glittery distraction, a harmless socialite with too many opinions and not enough power. That was exactly what she wanted them to think. Beneath the veneer of diplomatic immunity and cocktail parties, Lyra was hunting. For 6 months, reports had been trickling out of the fringe, reports of disappearances. Not just anyone, but non-registered genetic variants, people with recessive mutations, unauthorized splices and forgotten bloodlines. They were vanishing from transit hubs and colony worlds, leaving behind nothing but static on security feeds. Lyra checked her reflection in the dark glass of the customs kiosk. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and currently masked by a layer of bored detachment. She looked every inch the fallen aristocrat. "Welcome to Veyron Station," a computerized voice droned. "Please present identification for retinal scan." She leaned forward. The scanner flashed green. "Access granted. Envoy Voss, your escort is waiting at Platform 4. Lyra frowned slightly. She had not requested an escort. The Senate Guild, however, preferred to keep a leash on her, even if they called it a courtesy. She expected a standard guild droid or perhaps a bored junior officer in a stiff uniform. What she found at Platform 4 was neither. He was leaning against a support pillar, arms crossed over a chest that looked like it could stop a kinetic round. He wore standard security contractor grays, but on him, the uniform looked like it was struggling to contain the man beneath. He was tall, with a stillness that felt unnatural in the chaotic bustle of the arrival deck. As she approached, he lifted his head. Lyra faltered for a fraction of a second. His face was all sharp angles and rough stubble, marked by a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. But it was his eyes that stopped her. They were dark, almost black. But when the station lights hit them, there was a flicker of something else. Something gold. Something predatory. "Lyra Voss," he said. It was not a question. His voice was a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the floor plating. "I am," Lyra replied, recovering her composure. "And you are?" "Kale, assigned by the Guild to ensure your safety during the trade negotiations." Lyra looked him up and down, making a show of her skepticism. "I was under the impression I would be attended by a protocol droid. Kale, I have sensitive meetings. I require discretion, not a bodyguard who looks like he just walked out of an orbital fighting pit." Kale pushed himself off the pillar. He moved with a fluidity that unnerved her. A man that size should have lumbered. Kyle flowed. "Protocol droids are easily hacked," he said flatly. "I am not. Shall we go? The reception starts in 40 minutes. He did not offer to carry her bag. He simply turned and began walking, expecting her to follow. Lyra stared at his retreating back. The arrogance was breathtaking. She grabbed the handle of her maglev case and hurried to catch up, her irritation rising with every step. "You are not much for conversation, are you?" she asked as they stepped into the turbo lift. "I am paid to watch for threats, not to entertain you," Kale replied, staring straight ahead at the closing doors. And do you see any threats? Lyra asked, gesturing to the empty, pristine lift. 3, Cale said instantly. Lyra blinked. What? The man at the news kiosk was tracking your reflection in the glass. The maintenance drone on the ceiling has a modified sensor array, and you are carrying a concealed scanner in your coat lining that is emitting a low-frequency hum. If I can hear it. The guild security grid can hear it. Lyra froze. She felt a cold flush of adrenaline. She had paid a fortune for the scanner. It was supposed to be undetectable. You can hear it? She whispered. Cale finally looked at her. His gaze was heavy, weighing her intent. Turn it off, Voss, or this will be a very short trip. Lyra reached into her pocket and deactivated the device. The silence in the lift suddenly felt very loud. She looked at Cale with new eyes. He was not just a brute. He was observant to a degree that bordered on impossible. Who exactly are you? She asked. Cale watched the floor numbers tick upward. Just the help. The Senate Guild reception was a riot of excess. The ballroom was suspended inside a transparent dome at the top of the station, offering a panoramic view of the local nebula. Delegates from a dozen systems mingled, sipping iridescent nectar and trading lies. Lyra moved through the crowd like a shark in silk. She smiled, she nodded, she flattered. She played the game she hated, all while her mind raced. If the guild knew she was scanning for genetic data, her exile would turn into a prison sentence. Cale was a shadow at her shoulder. He refused a drink from a passing server with a sharp shake of his head. While Lyra engaged in complex verbal sparring with a crusty senator from the mining consortium, Cale stood with his back to the wall, his eyes scanning the room in a relentless grid pattern. Senator Vrax, Lyra said, laughing lightly at a joke that was not funny. You always have such a unique perspective on labor laws. But surely, the rumors of forced genetic indexing in the outer mines are just that. Rumors? Vrax, a portly man with skin the texture of wet clay, bristled. The Coalition listens to too much pirate radio. Envoy Voss, our workers are verified citizens and we simply ensure compatibility, Lyra repeated, testing the word, a fascinating euphemism. She felt Cale step closer. He did not touch her, but his presence became a physical wall of heat at her back. He is lying, Cale murmured. His voice was so low only she could hear it. Lyra did not react outwardly. How can you tell? She whispered back, taking a sip of her drink. Heart rate, Cale said. It spiked when you said genetic, and he smells like fear. Pungent. Lyra glanced at him. You can smell his fear? From here? Cale did not look at her. He was watching the senator's hands. He is sweating. It carries. Lyra looked back at Vrax. The senator was indeed wiping his palms on his tunic. Excuse me. Senator, Lyra said, flashing a dazzling smile. I see an old friend. She steered Cale away toward the balcony. You are useful, Lyra admitted, leaning against the railing. A human lie detector. Cale looked out at the nebula. His expression was bored. People lie constantly. It is the only language this room speaks. I prefer the quiet. You are in the wrong line of work then, Lyra said dryly. Politics is nothing but noise. Cale turned to her. He looked at her dress, her hair, the jewels at her throat. And you? You are good at it. You wear the lies well. Lyra felt a sting of defensiveness. It is necessary. I am trying to change things. By drinking expensive wine with monsters? Cale asked. His tone was not mocking. It was simply curious, which made it worse. Lyra straightened her spine. I am trying to stop a war. Cale, Sometimes that means shaking hands with people you want to strangle. You would not understand. You solve problems with a gun. Kale shrugged. Guns are honest. They do not pretend to be friends before they kill you. Before Lyra could retort, a chime rang through the hall. The lights dimmed. The main event was beginning. Officially, this was a charity auction for planetary restoration. Unofficially, Lyra knew it was a market for favors, secrets, and illegal tech. She needed to get backstage. The data regarding the missing variants was not in the ballroom. It was in the server nodes located in the storage levels below. "I need fresh air," Lyra announced loudly enough for the nearby guards to hear. "The perfume in here is suffocating." She moved toward the service corridors. Kyle blocked her path. "That is a restricted area," he said. Lyra glared at him. "Move, Kyle. I cannot protect you if you wander off into the maintenance shafts." "Then come with me," she hissed. "Or are you afraid of a little dust?" Kale stared at her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. A micro smile. "Lead the way, Envoy." They slipped through a service door and into the labyrinth of the station's underbelly. The transition was instant. The polished marble gave way to grimy metal gratings and exposed piping. The air grew hot and heavy. Lyra pulled a portable decoder from her clutch. "I am looking for a server room," she explained, abandoning the pretense. "Sector 7G. Kale moved ahead of her, his body language shifting. The boredom was gone. He was hunting now. "Why that sector?" he asked. "Because that is where the station holds seized cargo before auction," Lyra said. "And I think the cargo is not crates of wine." They descended 2 levels. The noise of the party faded, replaced by the thrum of atmospheric generators. Suddenly, Kale stopped. He threw an arm out, slamming Lyra back against the wall. "Quiet," he commanded. Lyra opened her mouth to argue, but the look on his face stopped her. His nostrils flared, his pupils had dilated until his eyes were entirely black. "3 men," Kale whispered. "Heavy boots, kinetic rifles. Around the corner." Lyra strained her ears. She heard nothing. "Are you sure?" Kale did not answer. He grabbed her hand, his grip was calloused and shockingly warm, and pulled her into a recessed alcove behind a stack of crates. Seconds later, a patrol marched past. They were not station security, and they wore matte black armor with no insignia. "Black Ops. Clear the perimeter," one of them said. "The buyer is arriving for the live lot." The live lot. Lyra felt a chill. They waited until the footsteps faded. "They are selling people," Lyra whispered, horror replacing her fear. "The missing variants." "We need to leave," Kyle said. "This is military-grade opposition. You are not equipped for this." "I am not leaving without proof," Lyra insisted. "If I can get a recording, I can bring the Senate down on them." Kale looked at her. He saw the tremble in her hands, but also the steel in her jaw. He let out a low, frustrated growl. "Fine. Stay behind me. If I say run, you run. Do not argue. Do not think. Just run." They moved deeper. They found the warehouse floor, overlooking a massive cargo bay. Below them, under harsh floodlights, cages were lined up. Inside were people. Some had scales. Some had extra limbs. Some looked human, but for the strange, luminescent quality of their skin. Lyra raised her wrist comp to record. "This is it," she breathed. "This is the evidence." A screech of metal echoed from the catwalk above them. A drone. "Intruder alert." The machine shrieked, "Sector 7G." Kale moved before the sound had even finished. He tackled Lyra, shielding her body with his own as a plasma bolt scorched the wall where her head had been a second ago. Run! Kale roared. He shoved her toward the maintenance catacombs. Chaos erupted. Soldiers poured onto the catwalks. Laser fire crisscrossed the air, sizzling against the metal crates. Lyra sprinted, her heels skidding on the grating. She kicked them off and ran barefoot. Kale was right behind her, firing a kinetic pistol he had seemingly produced from thin air. He didn't fire to suppress. Every shot he took dropped a target. They reached a heavy blast door at the end of the corridor. It was sealed. Lyra jammed her decoder into the panel. "It is encrypted," she shouted. "I need 2 minutes." "We do not have 2 minutes," Kale said. He looked back. A squad of armored troopers was rounding the bend, shields up. Kale holstered his weapon. He turned to the door. It was solid durasteel, 3 inches thick, designed to withstand a hull breach. "Step back." "Lyra, what are you doing? Step back." Lyra scrambled away. Kale planted his feet. He took a deep breath, and the sound was like a turbine spooling up. He grabbed the edges of the blast door with his bare hands. Then, it happened. Lyra watched, paralyzed, as the air around Kale seemed to warp. A low, guttural snarl ripped from his throat, distinct from any human sound. His shoulders broadened, the fabric of his uniform tearing at the seams. His eyes flared, not just a flicker this time. They ignited like molten amber, glowing with an internal, terrifying light. With a roar that shook the floor plates, Kale pulled. The sound of screeching metal was deafening. The durasteel groaned, bent, and then tore. He ripped the locked door apart as if it were made of wet cardboard. "Go!" he snarled. His voice was distorted, deeper, layered with a growl. Lyra scrambled through the jagged opening. Kale followed, shoving a massive crate in front of the hole to block their pursuers. He fell to his knees, gasping. His hands, Lyra stared at them. For a fleeting second, his fingers had been longer, tipped with obsidian claws. As she watched, the bones audibly clicked and shifted back into human proportions. The amber fire in his eyes dimmed, returning to dark brown. He looked up at her, sweat dripping from his face. He looked exhausted. Lyra could not speak. She had seen genetic mods before. She had seen cybernetic enhancements. This was neither. This was primal. "What are you?" she whispered. Kale stood up slowly, swaying slightly. "Not here," he rasped. "We need a safe house." The safe house was a small, forgotten maintenance hub deep in the station's infrastructure. Flickering neon panels cast the room in strobing shades of pink and electric blue. The air recycler hummed rhythmically. Lyra sat on a crate, hugging her knees. She was still shaking, not from the cold, but from the adrenaline crash. Kale stood by the door, watching the display on a portable jammer he had set up. He had stripped off his torn jacket, revealing a black undershirt and arms that were mapped with scars. "You saved my life," Lyra said quietly. Kale did not turn. "It is the job." "No," Lyra said, her voice gaining strength. "That was not the job. That was impossible. No human can tear open a blast door. I saw your eyes. Kyle, I saw your hands." Kale turned off the jammer display and faced her. The pink neon light washed over him, making the shadows on his face stark. "You wanted to know about the variants," he said softly. "The unauthorized genetics." Lyra nodded. Kyle walked to the center of the room. He looked tired, carrying a weight that seemed centuries old, 80 years ago. There was a program, Project Astral. It was funded by a coalition of 3 senators and the weapons guilds. They wanted a soldier that did not need armor, a soldier that could hunt in vacuum, see in the dark, and tear a tank apart with its bare hands. Lyra's breath hitched. "I have heard rumors, ghost stories. They said the project failed. They said the subjects were unstable. They were not unstable, Kyle said, his voice bitter. They were too effective, and they had a conscience. The Senate wanted biological drones. They got wolves. He looked Lyra dead in the eye. They terminated the program. They purged the labs. They hunted us down, one by one. Us? Lyra whispered. I am an astral wolf, Kale said. My designation is Kale 7. I am the last viable male. The silence in the room was heavy. Lyra looked at him, really looked at him. She should be terrified. He was a living weapon, a creature engineered for slaughter. Politically, he was a nuclear bomb. If the Senate found out she was harboring him, her life was over, but she didn't feel fear. As she looked at him, she felt a strange vibrating pull in the center of her chest. It was visceral, illogical, a sense of recognition, like hearing a song she had forgotten she knew. You are hiding in plain sight, she said, working for the very people who created you. It is the last place they look, Kale said, and I needed access. I have been tracking the hunters who killed my pack. He took a step toward her. You have seen me now. Lyra, you know what I am. Logic dictates I should silence you to protect myself. Lyra stood up. She walked toward him until she was inches away. She had to tilt her head back to look him in the eyes. You won't, she said. Kyle frowned, confused by her proximity. How do you know? Because you protected me before you even knew who I was, Lyra said. You stood between me and the laser fire. A monster would have used me as a shield. Kale stared at her. The amber light flickered deep in his irises again. The proximity was affecting him too. He could smell her fear fading, replaced by something sweeter. Trust, and something else, a biological resonance that made his inner wolf pace restlessly against the bars of his control. Get back, Lyra, he warned, his voice straining. You do not know what is happening. Tell me, she challenged. It is the bond, he ground out. We were designed to pair. To imprint on a mate who grounds us. It activates under stress. Lyra felt her heart hammer against her ribs. And it is happening. Right now. The air between them seemed to crackle. Lyra felt a surge of sensation that wasn't hers, a spike of protectiveness, a wave of heat, a sharp metallic tang of aggression that belonged to Kale. It was like the universe had snapped a thread tight between them, pulling them inevitably together. She reached out, her hand hovering over the scar on his arm. Kale flinched, but he did not pull away. Sudden booming thunder shook the room. The door behind Kale exploded inward. Kale moved faster than thought. He spun, grabbing Lyra and throwing her behind the heavy command console. Stay down, he roared. The room filled with smoke and the whine of high-velocity rounds. The hunters had found them. This wasn't a patrol. This was a hit squad. Lyra peeked over the console. Kale was in the center of the room, and he was no longer holding back. He moved like a blur of shadow. He didn't shift fully, there wasn't room. But he was fighting with the feral grace of the predator he was. He disarmed a soldier, broke the man's arm with a sickening crunch, and used the body to block a burst of fire. But there were too many of them. Lyra saw a soldier flanking to the right, raising a tranquilizer rifle aimed at Kale's exposed back. Kyle, behind you! She screamed. Kale didn't just hear her. He felt her warning. The bond flared white-hot. He dropped to the floor, the dart sailing harmlessly over his head, and swept the soldier's legs out from under him. The connection was dizzying. Lyra could feel his location in the room without looking. She could feel his rage. It was intoxicating. She saw a loose power cable sparking near a puddle of coolant where the soldiers were standing. Kale! The water! She shouted. He understood instantly. He grabbed the live cable and whipped it into the puddle. Blue lightning arced through the room. The soldiers screamed as the voltage locked their armor suits, dropping them into twitching heaps. Silence returned, broken only by the crackle of the cable and their heavy breathing. Kyle stood amidst the bodies. He was bleeding from a graze on his cheek. He looked wild, terrifying, and magnificent. He turned to Lyra. The amber in his eyes was blazing now, unhidden. He walked to her, checking her for injuries with a desperate intensity. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. "No," Lyra breathed. She looked up at the wall monitor. It had flickered to life during the fight. It was broadcasting a Senate emergency alert. Her face appeared on the screen. Wanted for treason, Lyra Voss, and next to her, a grainy image of Cale from the warehouse security feed, his eyes glowing, his strength exposed. The scrolling text beneath his face was red and bold. Classification: Project Astral. Biological weapon. Galactic level threat. Kill on sight. Lyra read the words, and the reality of their situation crashed down on her. The investigation, the auction, the bond, it all led to this moment. She looked at the screen, then at the man standing before her, the man who had just dismantled a kill squad to keep her safe. "They hunted her alien wolf mate," she whispered, the words forming a strange prophetic poetry on her tongue. The news anchor's voice cut through the static, completing the thought, claiming the rogue unit is a galactic-level threat. Citizens are advised to seek shelter. Cale looked at the screen. He saw his face. He saw the designation he had run from for 20 years. He looked back at Lyra. The fear was gone from him now. It was replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "They know," he said. Lyra reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, engulfing them. The bond hummed, a warm, unbreakable current. "Let them come," Lyra said. "We will expose them." Cale pulled her closer, his voice dropping to a low, lethal register that made the hair on her arms stand up. "No, Lyra, we will not just expose them." He looked at the camera on the screen, as if staring directly into the eyes of the Senate. "If they come for you, I will not be a diplomat. I will not be a soldier. I will be the shadow in every corridor of power. I will be the monster they invented." He squeezed her hand. "And I will hunt them until there is no one left to give the order." The holographic projection flickered in the cramped cockpit of the stolen transport shuttle, casting a blue pallor over Lyra's face. The face of the High Chancellor filled the air, his features composed into a mask of grave concern that Lyra knew took 3 hours of makeup to achieve. "Citizens of the galaxy," the Chancellor's voice boomed, rattling the loose panels of the shuttle. "In light of the recent terror attack at Veyrun Station, the Senate has unanimously ratified the Moonchain Decree." Lyra leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. She watched the scrolling text beneath the Chancellor's image. It was dense with legal jargon, but she stripped it away instantly, translating the legalese into cold, hard reality. "The decree authorizes the immediate deputization of all private bounty guilds," the Chancellor continued. "Any information leading to the capture or neutralization of the Class A bio-threat known as the Astral Wolf will be rewarded with full citizenship tiers and 10 million credits. This is for your protection." The feed cut to a loop of Kyle tearing through the blast door, but the footage had been doctored. The shadows were darker. His eyes glowed a demonic red instead of amber, and the audio had been layered with bestial roaring that he had never made. Lyra killed the feed with a savage swipe of her hand. "It is a lie," she said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. Cale sat in the pilot's seat, staring out at the streaking stars of hyperspace. He had not moved since the broadcast began. It is a very expensive lie, Kale said quietly. 10 million credits. Everyone from the core to the rim will be looking for a payout. Lyra stood up and paced the small cabin. The shuttle smelled of stale, recycled air and fear. Do you not see what they are doing? She asked. This is not about public safety. The Senate does not spend that kind of money to hunt a single fugitive unless that fugitive carries a secret that can destroy them. She stopped behind his chair, gripping the headrest. They are terrified. Kale. The Moonchain Decree is a smokescreen. They are trying to erase the evidence of the astral program before we can decode it. They want you dead not because you are a monster, but because you are a witness. Kale adjusted the nav computer. His movements were precise, controlled, but Lyra could feel the tension radiating off him. The bond between them, now fully awake, hummed like a high-tension wire. She could feel his instinct to run, to fight, to turn around and tear the Senate apart with his bare hands. We need a place to disappear, Kyle said, ignoring her analysis. A place where 10 million credits buys you a knife in the back, but the Senate has no eyes. Lyra looked at the star chart. Kairos, she said. Kale looked at her over his shoulder. The drifting market moon? It is a cesspool. It is perfect, Lyra countered. It has no central government, no extradition treaties, and the atmospheric interference scrambles long-range scanners. Plus, I have a contact there. Kyle raised an eyebrow. The scar through his brow crinkled. You have a contact in a pirate haven? I made some interesting friends during my exile, Lyra said, lifting her chin. Set a course. Kairos did not look like a moon so much as a tumor of rust and neon clinging to the side of a dead asteroid. It was a sprawling vertical city built from the cannibalized hulls of crashed starships, tethered together by gravity cables and prayer. They docked in a lower sector, slipping the harbor master a bribe that cost Lyra her platinum bracelet. As they stepped out onto the promenade, the sensory assault was immediate. The air was thick with the smell of frying insects, sulfur, and ozone. Music thumped from a dozen different clubs, a chaotic clash of bass and synth. Lyra pulled the hood of her cloak tighter. She had attempted to dress down for the occasion, raiding the shuttle's emergency locker for spare crew clothes. She wore oversized mechanics coveralls that she had belted with a piece of rope, and she had rubbed grease on her cheeks in an attempt to look weather-beaten. She felt ridiculous. Kyle walked beside her, scanning the crowd. He blended in effortlessly. The danger that radiated off him acted as a natural repellent. People took one look at his size and the way he moved and instinctively stepped out of his path. Lyra, however, was drawing stares. Is it the grease? Lyra whispered, keeping her head down. I put on too much grease, didn't I? Kyle glanced at her. His expression was deadpan. You look like a Grand Duchess who fell into an engine turbine, he said. Lyra scowled at him. I am trying to blend in. Kale. It is called camouflage. It is called a costume. Kale corrected. You walk with your chin up. You step over puddles instead of through them. And that rope belt is tied in a perfect decorative knot. Lyra looked down at her waist and hastily untied the knot, messing it up. I hate you, she muttered, though there was no heat in it. I know, Kale said. But for the record, the grease is charming. It highlights your cheekbones. Lyra looked at him sharply, but he was already scanning the rooftops, his jaw set. A flush of warmth moved through her that had nothing to do with the humid air of the market. They pushed through the throngs of people. There were species here Lyra had only read about, four-armed traders from the Silica Nebulas, monks in ragged robes selling prayer beads made of spent shell casings, and cybernetic hustlers dealing memory chips. We are looking for the blind side of the moon, Lyra said. My contact operates out of a data den called the Rust Bucket. They found it nestled between a brothel and a salvage yard. The sign was missing the letter B, reading simply, the Rust Bucket. Inside, the air was hazy with vapor smoke. Tables were crowded with patrons gambling with credit chips and small vials of Tabana gas. In the back corner, sitting on a throne made of welded pipes, was Juno Rake. Juno was a man who wore his charm like a loaded weapon. He was lean, with skin the color of polished copper and eyes that had been modified with spinning apertures. He wore a velvet coat that had seen better decades, and he was currently juggling 3 knives while dictating a message to a floating drone. Lyra Voss, Juno called out, his voice smooth as oil. The galaxy's most wanted diplomat. To what do I owe the pleasure? Or are you just here to ruin my reputation by being seen with me? Lyra approached the table, Kale close on her heels. I need information, Juno, and I need it quiet. Juno caught the knives in one fluid motion and stabbed them into the table. He leaned forward, his aperture eyes whirring as they focused on her. Quiet is expensive, darling, especially with the price on your head. And who is the mountain of muscle looming behind you? This is Kale, Lyra said. My associate. Juno looked Kale up and down, a smirk playing on his lips. He looks like he bites. Does he bite? Lyra? Because I have always liked a little danger. A low, vibrating growl started in Kale's chest. It wasn't a human sound. It was the rumble of a predator warning a rival away from a kill. The hair on Juno's arm stood up. Kale, Lyra warned softly. Juno laughed, but he leaned back, putting a little distance between himself and the astral wolf. Touchy. All right, let us talk business. You want to know who is hunting you? I want to know who is paying them, Lyra corrected. The Moon Chain Decree mentions a private fund. I need to know where the money is coming from. Juno tapped his chin. I might have intercepted a few encrypted bursts from the Senate banking clan, but decoding them requires processing power I do not give away for free. Name your price, Lyra said. Juno stood up and walked around the table. He stopped inches from Lyra, ignoring Kale's darkening gaze. He reached out and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. A dinner, Juno whispered. Just us. When this is all over, I have always had a soft spot for idealists. The air in the room temperature dropped 10 degrees. Kyle moved. He did not step. He simply appeared between Lyra and Juno. His hand shot out and gripped Juno by the throat. It wasn't a choke, yet, but it was a promise. She is not for sale, Kale snarled, and she is not for dinner. Juno gasped, his feet lifting an inch off the floor. His guards reached for their weapons, but Kale's free hand was already hovering over his pistol. Kale, stop! Lyra shouted. She grabbed Kale's forearm. It was as hard as granite. Let him go. Now! Kale looked at her. His eyes were flooding with amber light. The bond was screaming at him. Protect. Claim. Destroy the threat. He is touching you. Kale grated out. He is flirting. Kale, it is harmless. Put him down. Kale held him for a second longer, his nostrils flaring as he memorized Juno's scent. Then he released him. Juno stumbled back, coughing and massaging his throat. He looked at Kale with a mix of fear and admiration. Point taken. Juno wheezed. No dinner, just credits. 50,000. Transfer it, Lyra said to Kale. Kale glared at Juno, then tapped his wrist comp. The credits transferred. Juno handed Lyra a data spike. The ledger is in there. It is encrypted, but the keys are embedded. And Lyra, keep your pet on a leash. He is liable to start a war all by himself. They did not speak until they reached the upper levels of the market, where Lyra had secured a temporary safe house in an abandoned cargo loft. The loft was high above the smog, with a skylight that looked out into the void. It was empty save for a few crates and a pile of dusty tarps. Lyra threw the data spike onto a crate and spun around to face Cale. "What was that?" she demanded. Cale was pacing the perimeter, checking the window seals. He did not look at her. He was disrespectful. He was a contact. "We need him. You almost crushed his windpipe because he asked me to dinner?" Cale stopped pacing. He turned to her, and the raw intensity in his face took Lyra's breath away. "It is not just jealousy, Lyra. It is biological. When he stepped into your space, everything in me screamed that he was a threat. The wolf does not understand social nuance. It only understands possession." "Possession," Lyra repeated, her voice cooling. She walked over to him, forcing him to meet her gaze. "I am not a territory to be defended, Cale. And I am not a thing to be possessed." Cale looked down at her. The conflict in his eyes was painful to watch. The man was fighting the programming, fighting the instincts that had been spliced into his DNA. "I know," he whispered. "But when I look at you, the noise in my head stops. And when someone else threatens to take you, the noise comes back, louder than before. I am afraid, Lyra. Afraid of what? That I cannot stop it. That I will hurt someone you need, or I will hurt you just to keep you close." Lyra's anger evaporated. She saw the torture he was living in, a mind divided between a man's conscience and a monster's drive. She reached up and placed her hands on his face. His skin was burning hot. "Cale, listen to me." She waited until his eyes locked onto hers. "You are not the wolf. You are Cale. You have a choice. Every time you feel that instinct, you have a choice." She ran her thumb over the scar on his cheek. "I chose you," she whispered. "Not because of a bond, not because of destiny. I chose you because I trust the man, not the programming. But you have to trust me too. You have to trust that I can handle a thief in a velvet coat." Cale closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. He let out a long, shuddering breath. "I am trying," he murmured. "It is just hard. You smell like starlight and ozone. It makes me drunk." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. The atmosphere in the loft shifted. The argument faded, replaced by the heavy magnetic pull that had been building since Veyrun Station. The adrenaline of the flight, the fear of the market, the anger, it all coalesced into a sharp, aching need. Lyra stepped closer, until her body was pressed against his. She felt the rigid muscles of his chest, the rapid thrum of his heart that matched her own. "I am not going anywhere," she said softly. Cale opened his eyes. The amber was gone, replaced by a dark, consuming heat. He reached out and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her in. It wasn't the rough grab he had used on Juno, it was desperate, almost reverent. "Lyra." He breathed against her hair. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply. A shiver cascaded down Lyra's spine. The bond flared again, but this time it wasn't a warning. It was a wave of shared longing, a feedback loop of desire that blurred the lines between where she ended and he began. She gripped the back of his neck, her fingers tangling in his short hair. "Kiss me," she whispered. Cale pulled back just enough to look at her lips. He hesitated, as if afraid he would break her. "If I start," he rasped, "I do not know if I can stop." "Then don't." He crashed his mouth onto hers. It was hungry, fierce, and tasting of desperation. Lyra met him with equal force, her hands roaming over his broad shoulders, pulling him down to her. They stumbled backward, hitting the pile of tarps. Kale shifted his weight, pressing her into the makeshift bed, his body a heavy, grounding weight over hers. He kissed her jaw, her throat, murmuring her name like a prayer. The world outside, the bounty, the Senate, the war, ceased to exist. There was only this, the heat of his skin, the rough slide of his hands, and the promise that even if the galaxy burned tomorrow, they would burn together. As the starlight from the window washed over them, Lyra pulled him closer, the darkness of the room swallowing them whole. Hours later, the loft was quiet. Kyle sat on the edge of the crate, fully dressed again, cleaning his pistol. Lyra sat cross-legged opposite him, the data spike plugged into a portable reader. Her hair was messy, her lips swollen, but her eyes were sharp with focus. She scrolled through the holographic lines of code Juno had provided. "I found it," she said, breaking the silence. Kyle looked up, holstering the weapon. "The money trail?" Lyra nodded. "It is convoluted, hidden behind shell companies and charitable fronts. But it all leads back to 3 accounts: Senator Vrax, Senator Corell, and the Helix Guild. The weapons manufacturers," Kale said, his voice flat. "They paid for Project Astral," Lyra said, reading the file. "And here. This is the ledger for the current hunt. They are paying the bounties directly. But look at this note attached to the transfer." She spun the hologram so he could see. Subject: Kale 7. Condition: alive preferred. Extraction of neural cortex required for Phase 2. They do not just want you dead, Lyra realized, horror cold in her stomach. They want your brain. They want to know why you didn't break, why you didn't go insane like the others, so they can fix the flaw. Kale finished, "And make more of me." He stood up, his face hardening. "We have to move. If Juno found this, the hunters are not far behind." As if on cue, a low hum vibrated through the floorboards. It wasn't the station's engines. It was the sound of a repulsor lift engine hovering directly outside the skylight. Kale spun toward the window just as the glass exploded. "Get down!" Canisters hissed into the room, spewing thick, green gas. "Anti-shift toxin," Kyle shouted, coughing. He grabbed Lyra and dragged her behind a heavy support pillar. The gas burned Lyra's throat, tasting of copper and pepper. Through the broken skylight, figures descended on zip lines. They weren't the standard thugs from the market. These were pros. They wore sealed environmental suits and carried rifles that glowed with blue energy, halo nets, designed to capture, not kill. Target acquired. A mechanized voice echoed, "Would deploy containment." Kale looked at Lyra. His eyes were watering, the toxin already working to suppress his biology. He looked at his hands. They were trembling. "I cannot shift," he gritted out. "The gas, it locks the genes." "You do not need to shift," Lyra said, grabbing his pistol and shoving it into his hand. "You are still the most dangerous man in this room." Kyle took the gun. He took a breath, holding it, and rolled out from behind the pillar. He fired 3 shots. 3 hunters dropped, their knee joints shattered. Kale moved into the cloud of gas. He didn't have his wolf strength, but he had his training. He ducked under a swinging rifle butt, used the hunter's momentum to flip him, and slammed the man's helmet into the floor. More hunters poured in from the stairwell. Lyra stayed low, using the pillar for cover. She saw a hunter taking aim at Kale with a net launcher. "Kale! 9 o'clock." Kale spun. The net fired, a web of crackling energy. He dove, the net grazing his boot, and came up with a combat knife in his hand. He closed the distance to the shooter. The wolf inside him was screaming, "Rip his throat out, tear him apart, make them fear you." Kale had the knife raised. He could end it in one strike. The hunter was exposed, but he heard Lyra's voice in his head. I chose the man, not the weapon. Cale twisted his wrist at the last second. Instead of stabbing the neck, he drove the pommel of the knife into the hunter's temple. The man collapsed, unconscious but alive. He moved through the squad like a whirlwind of efficiency. Break a wrist, dislocate a shoulder, shatter a kneecap. It was brutal, but it was controlled. He left a trail of groaning bodies, not corpses, but Lyra watched him from the shadows, and she saw the cost. Every time he pulled a punch, every time he chose to incapacitate rather than kill. His body shuddered, veins bulged in his neck. He was fighting the toxin, fighting the enemy, and fighting the overwhelming biological imperative to slaughter. A final hunter lunged at him with a vibro blade. Cale caught the blade with his armored forearm, the metal sparking. He headbutted the hunter, the sound of cracking impact echoing in the loft. The hunter fell. Silence returned, save for the hissing of the gas canisters and the groans of the wounded. Cale stood in the center of the carnage. He was gasping for air, sweat soaking his shirt. He dropped the knife. His hands were shaking so badly he had to clench them into fists. Lyra ran to him. She pulled a rebreather mask from one of the unconscious hunters and pressed it to Cale's face. Breathe, she commanded. Cale took deep, ragged breaths of the clean oxygen. The amber in his eyes was dull, muddy. I didn't kill them, he managed to say, his voice wrecked. I saw, Lyra said, gripping his arms. You did good. Cale, you did good. He looked at the hunters writhing on the floor. They will come back. There will always be more. Lyra looked down at the leader of the squad. Clipped to his belt was a hardened data case. She snatched it up and cracked the seal. Inside was a single holographic projection. It wasn't a bounty order. It was a map, a star map, complex and ancient, pointing to a sector of space that was officially listed as empty void. But on this map, a massive structure was marked. The umbral spine, Lyra whispered. Beneath the coordinates, a handwritten note flickered in the hologram. It was signed by the Helix Guild. Release the wolves, ignite the war. Lyra looked at Cale. The realization hit them both at the same time. They are not just hunting you, Cale said, staring at the map. They are going to the spine. To do what? Lyra asked. Cale wiped the blood from his cheek. To release the others. The failed experiments. The ones that didn't have a conscience. He looked at the open window. To the stars beyond. We have to get there first. The asteroid was not on any official chart. It was a jagged splinter of rock drifting in the debris field of a collapsed moon. A graveyard of silence where the starlight seemed to die before it hit the surface. This was the final resting place of Dr. Eris Thorne, the genetic architect who had breathed life into the astral program, and it was now the most dangerous library in the galaxy. Lyra steered the shuttle through the asteroid field with white-knuckled precision. The sensors screamed warnings as rocks the size of city blocks tumbled past their viewport. There is a docking port on the dark side, Cale said, his eyes scanning the void with a clarity the ship's computer could not match. It is shielded. Lyra adjusted the thrusters, swinging the vessel around a massive crag. How do you know? She asked. Cale hesitated. I remember this place, not as a memory, but as data. Thorne programmed the coordinates into our navigation cortex during the incubation phase. It feels like coming home. He looked at the jagged rock, his expression grim. A home built by a madman. They docked in silence. The airlock hissed open, revealing a corridor that smelled of stale oxygen and ancient dust. The gravity was artificial and heavy, pulling at Lyra's bones. They had barely taken 10 steps when the lights flickered. The corridor stretched, twisted, and suddenly dissolved. Lyra gasped, The walls were gone. Instead, she was standing on the edge of a precipice, looking down into a churning ocean of lava. The heat hit her face, visceral and terrifying. "It is an illusion." Kale's voice came from beside her, calm and grounding. Lyra reached out. Her hand passed through a plume of fire without burning. Neuroholographics, she deduced, her heart rate slowly coming down. Thorn was paranoid. He rigged this place to terrify intruders into turning back. Or falling, Kale noted, pointing to the floor. Where the holographic lava churned, the floor panels were actually missing. A real drop into the asteroid's core waited for a careless step. "Stay close," Kale said. He moved ahead, testing the ground with his heavy boots. They navigated the maze of nightmares. Corridors turned into jungles of carnivorous plants, then into vacuum-exposed airlocks. Through it all, Kyle was the anchor, his senses cutting through the visual lies to find the solid reality beneath. They reached a massive circular door made of black obsidian. There was no handle, no keypad, only a single glowing inscription in an archaic dialect of the inner core. "I have no voice, but I command empires. I have no hands, but I build walls between lovers. What am I?" Lyra sighed, crossing her arms. A riddle. Of course, Thorn was a genius, but he had a flair for the dramatic. She studied the door, her mind racing through metaphorical possibilities. Silence? No, that is too simple. Fear. Perhaps. Kale walked up to the door. He inspected the smooth surface, then tapped the stone near the inscription. "It is a pressure sensor," he said. "It is a logic puzzle." "Kale," Lyra corrected him, stepping beside him. "We need to speak the answer. If we get it wrong, the defense turrets will likely incinerate us. The answer is likely truth or trust." Kale looked at the door, then at the heavy locking mechanism concealed within the wall frame. "The answer is silence," he said flatly. "Because if I break the audio receiver, it cannot hear us get it wrong." Before Lyra could stop him, Kale drove his fist into the panel next to the riddle. There was a crunch of circuitry, a spark, and then the grinding sound of the heavy door sliding open. Lyra stared at him, then at the open door. "That was cheating," she said. Kale shrugged, rubbing his knuckles. "It was efficient. You solve the riddle your way, I solve it mine. We are inside, aren't we?" Lyra fought a smile. "Remind me never to play chess with you. You would probably eat the board." They stepped into the sanctum. It was a vast spherical chamber lined with banks of memory crystals. In the center, suspended in a beam of blue light, was a stasis pod. It was empty. "Dr. Thorn," Lyra whispered. She approached the central console. It was dusty, but alive. She plugged in her datapad, bypassing the encryption with the keys they had stolen from the archive. The room darkened. A holographic projection materialized in the center of the air. It was a man, gaunt, wild-haired, with eyes that looked too big for his face. "Dr. Aris Thorn. If you are seeing this," the recording began, the voice scratchy and tired, "then I am dead. And if you are who I think you are, I am sorry." Kale stiffened. He walked toward the ghost of his creator. "The Senate wanted weapons." Thorn continued. "They wanted biological tanks. But I gave them something else. I gave them guardians." A schematic appeared in the air, a double helix of DNA, glowing gold. "The astral wolf was not designed to conquer," Thorn said. "It was designed to bond, to find a moral anchor, a mate, and protect them with absolute prejudice. The violence was never the point. The loyalty was." Lyra looked at Kale. He was watching the hologram with a mixture of hunger and hatred. "But they found out," Thorn said, his voice dropping. "The Helix Guild. Senator Vrax. They realize that a soldier with a conscience is useless to an empire that wants to commit genocide, so they forced me to add a flaw. The golden DNA in the schematic turned an angry, pulsing red. The apex trigger, Thorne whispered, a dormant genetic sequence. If subjected to extreme torture or a specific sonic frequency, the wolf's higher brain functions shut down. The bond is severed. The protector becomes a destroyer, a mindless beast of pure instinct and rage. Lyra felt the blood drain from her face. That is the plan, she realized. That is why they want him alive. I tried to hide the triggers. Thorne wept, his image flickering. I tried to delete the sequence, but I failed. They are walking bombs. If the Senate activates them, God forgive me. The recording ended. The room was plunged back into silence. Kyle stood frozen. He looked at his hands, turning them over slowly. A walking bomb, he murmured. That is all I am. A catastrophe waiting for a signal. Lyra moved to him, grabbing his arm. No, you heard him. You were meant to be a guardian. The protective instinct, the bond, that is the truth of you. The apex trigger is a corruption they forced on you. Kale pulled away from her, walking to the edge of the platform. He looked out at the rows of silent memory banks. Does it matter? The corruption is in my blood. Lyra, it is not a suit I can take off. If they catch me, if they trigger it, I will not know you. I will not know myself. I will tear this galaxy apart, and I will probably start with you. He turned to her, and the despair in his eyes broke her heart. You should leave me here. Lyra, lock me in this tomb. It is the only way to be safe. Lyra closed the distance between them. She did not run, but she moved with a purpose that was terrifying in its own right. Stop it, she commanded. I am trying to save you, Kale shouted, his voice cracking. Do you not understand? I am the monster in the story. Lyra grabbed the lapels of his jacket and slammed him back against the console. He was a foot taller and 3 times her weight, but he let her move him. You are not a monster, she hissed, her face inches from his. You are a man who is scared, and that is fine. Be scared, but do not you dare try to make that decision for me. She softened her grip, her hands sliding up to cup his jaw. I do not love a weapon, Kyle. I do not love a genetic experiment. I love the man who tears doors off hinges to save me but refuses to kill the soldiers hunting him because he knows it would hurt me to watch. I love the man who is terrified of his own power because he values gentleness. Kale's breath hitched. If they break me, he whispered, if I turn. Then I will bring you back, Lyra said fiercely. She pressed her forehead against his. We make a vow, right now, you and me. Kale's hands came up to hold her waist, his grip bruisingly tight. What vow? Partnership, Lyra said. Not possession. I am not your anchor because you are forced to have one. I am your anchor because you choose me, and you are not my bodyguard. You are my equal. We do not protect each other because of programming. We protect each other because we want to. Kale looked into her eyes, searching for any sign of doubt. He found none. I choose you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I will always choose you, even if my mind breaks. Even if the darkness takes everything else, I will leave a light on for you. Lyra kissed him. It was not the desperate, adrenaline-fueled kiss of the loft. It was slow, deliberate, and sealed with the weight of a promise. It felt like a contract signed in blood and starlight. As they pulled apart, a slow, sarcastic clapping echoed from the entrance of the chamber. Lyra spun around, Kale instantly shifting in front of her, standing in the doorway, flanked by a squad of elite commandos in stealth armor, was a man Lyra knew well. He was handsome in a severe, sharp-edged way, his uniform pressed to perfection. Commander Sarek Vale. Touching, Sarek said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. Truly, I almost regret that we have to interrupt. Sarek, Lyra said, her voice cold. I should have known. You always did have a talent for showing up where you were not wanted. Sarek walked down the ramp, his movements casual. I am here to save you, Lyra. You have been gone a long time. We were worried you had succumbed to Stockholm Syndrome. He gestured to Kale with a dismissive wave of his hand. Step away from the creature. Lyra, we have a containment unit ready. It will not be painful, Kale growled, a low, vibrating sound that shook the floor. Sarek smiled. See, it threatens you even now. He is not threatening me. Sarek, Lyra said, stepping out from behind Kale. He is threatening you, and frankly, I agree with him. Sarek stopped. His smile faded, replaced by a look of disappointed patience. Lyra, be reasonable. I know you found the data. You know what he is. He is a biological weapon designed to destabilize the core worlds. The Senate needs to study him to prevent a war. The Senate wants to use him to start a war, Lyra shouted. We saw the files. Sarek, the massacre, the Apex trigger. It is all a setup, and you are helping them. Sarek sighed. He smoothed the front of his tunic. Governance requires hard choices. Lyra, you always were an idealist. You think peace is a natural state. It is not. Peace is enforced. If sacrificing one genetic aberration secures order for the next century, that is a price I am willing to pay. And what about the price of your soul? Lyra asked. Sarek's eyes hardened. I am offering you immunity. Lyra, full reinstatement. You can return to the capital. You can make a difference again. All you have to do is walk away. Give us the wolf, and you go free. Help us save the galaxy. Lyra looked at Sarek. They had attended the academy together. They had debated ethics in sunlit courtyards. She had once thought he was the future of the coalition. Now, looking at him, she saw only a hollow man filled with the echoes of orders he was too cowardly to question. She reached back and took Kale's hand. No, she said. Sarek blinked. Excuse me? I said no. I will not trade a life for a lie. Morality is not something you barter with. Sarek, it is what you choose when it is inconvenient. Lyra squeezed Kale's hand. We leave together, or not at all. Sarek stared at her for a long moment. Then, he looked at Kale. So be it, he said softly. He raised his hand. Take them. The squad moved instantly. This was not a capture team. This was an execution squad. Kale roared, shoving Lyra behind the heavy central console. Stay down! He launched himself at the soldiers. This time, there was no holding back. He shifted partially, his claws extending, his speed doubling. He tore through the first line of defense, throwing a soldier across the room like a rag doll. But Sarek had come prepared. Sonic cannons deployed from the rear, blasting waves of high-frequency distortion. Kale stumbled, clutching his head, roaring in pain. The sound was designed to trigger the apex state, to shatter his control. Focus! Kale! Lyra screamed, pulling her pistol and firing over the console. She hit a soldier in the shoulder, but there were too many of them. Kyle fought through the pain. He was a whirlwind of violence, but he was slowing down. The sonic blasts were disorienting him. His eyes flickered between amber and a terrifying blood-red crimson. Sarek watched calmly from the ramp. He drew a long, slender blade from his belt. It hummed with a violet energy field. A suppressor blade. neurotoxin-coated charge to disrupt synaptic pathways. One cut would paralyze a nervous system instantly. Sarek waited for an opening. He wasn't looking at Kale. He was looking at Lyra. He moved while Kale was engaged with 3 soldiers. Sarek vaulted over the console, the blade aimed directly at Lyra's chest. It was a calculated move. He knew he couldn't beat the wolf, but he knew the wolf's weakness. Lyra raised her gun, but she was too slow. The blade came down. Kale! The scream tore through the sonic haze in Kale's mind. He didn't think. He didn't calculate. He simply ceased to be where he was and appeared where he needed to be. He threw himself between Sarek and Lyra. The blade didn't hit Lyra. It buried itself deep into Kale's side, sliding between his ribs. The sound of the impact was sickening. Kale froze. The violet energy of the blade discharged into his body, lighting up his skeleton in a flash of agony. He gasped, his eyes locking onto Lyra's. "Lyra!" He slumped forward. "No!" Lyra screamed. She caught him as he fell, the weight of him crushing her to the floor. Sarek stepped back, pulling the blade free. Kyle convulsed, then went still. He wasn't dead. His chest was heaving with shallow breaths, but he was paralyzed, his eyes wide and unseeing. Sarek looked down at them, wiping the blade on his pants. "I told you, Lyra. He is a slave to his instincts. I knew he would take the blow." Lyra looked up at him. Her hands were covered in Kale's blood. The shock was fading, replaced by something colder, something darker. "You used his love against him," she whispered. "I used his programming," Sarek corrected. The soldiers moved in, securing Kale with magnetic clamps. They dragged him away from her. Lyra reached for him, but a soldier held her back. "Kale!" she screamed. Sarek leaned down, gripping Lyra's chin. "He is going to the containment facility at the Dead Star. We will trigger the Apex form, and when he is done slaughtering the colony we have selected, we will have our war. And you will be in a cell, watching it all happen." He straightened up. "Take her to the brig." As the soldiers hauled her away, Lyra did not struggle. She did not cry. She looked at Kale's limp body being loaded onto a stasis sled. She looked at Sarek's retreating back. She felt the bond in her mind, faint, terrified, but still there. Kale was alive, and as long as he was alive, the war was not over. Lyra Voss had spent her life building bridges. She had spent her career negotiating peace. She had always believed that the pen was mightier than the sword. But as they dragged her out of the archive, Lyra Voss decided that she was done with pens. She was going to break the Senate. She was going to shatter their conspiracy. And she was going to burn Sarek Vale's world to ash to get her wolf back. The diplomat was dead. The legend was just beginning. The rescue ship was a retrofitted medical frigate called the Mercy, a name that Juno Rake found hilariously ironic given the lethal capacity of the crew currently huddled in its cockpit. Outside the viewport, the universe had died. They were orbiting a brown dwarf, a failed star that emitted no light, only an oppressive bruising gravity and a wash of deadly radiation. Hanging in this abyssal twilight was the prison known as the Oubliette. It was a gothic nightmare of black iron and jagged spires, designed not just to contain prisoners, but to break their souls before their bodies even had a chance to rot. It looked like a cathedral dedicated to the worship of pain. Lyra Voss stood at the helm, staring at the fortress. She wore a pristine white uniform with the high collar and gold braiding of a Senate high auditor. It was a forgery, stitched together by a fabricator in the cargo hold 2 hours ago. But she wore it like she had been born in it. "We are entering the engagement zone," said the man in the pilot's chair. His name was Silas. He was 60 years old, with skin like cured leather and a cybernetic right eye that whirred softly when he blinked. He was a retired hunter, a man who had spent 30 years tracking genetic variants for the guilds until the guilt had hollowed him out. Lyra had found him in a dive bar on the edge of the sector, drinking away the faces of the things he had killed. She had offered him redemption. He had taken it. Juno was pacing behind them, nervously spinning a data spike between his fingers. "This is insanity," Juno muttered. "Beautiful, poetic insanity. If your codes do not work. Lyra, we are going to be vaporized by the perimeter turrets in about 10 seconds. "They will work," Lyra said, her voice ice cold. "Because they are real codes. I did not steal them. I remembered them from my time on the Appropriations Committee. I signed the budget authorization for this hellhole 5 years ago." She adjusted her cuffs, her face a mask of imperious boredom. "I paid for the guns." "Juno, they will not shoot the landlord." Silas grunted, hailing frequency open. "You are on Voss." A face appeared on the main screen. It was Warden Krell, a man with a face that looked like it had been melted and reshaped by an impatient sculptor. "Unidentified vessel," Krell barked. "You are in restricted space. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded, or we will open fire." Lyra leaned forward, letting the harsh light of the console illuminate her severe expression. "Warden Krell," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "I am High Auditor Vane of the Senate Oversight Committee. I am currently staring at a sensor reading that suggests your perimeter grid is misaligned by 0.4%. If you fire on me, not only will you miss, but I will have you reassigned to a waste processing station in the Garner Belt before my debris hits your shielding." Krell hesitated. The arrogance was perfect. It was the specific, terrifying arrogance of the inner core elite. "Auditor Vane, we have no record of a scheduled inspection. That is the point of a surprise inspection." "Warden," Lyra snapped, "we have reports of irregular energy signatures and containment breaches in the Class A secure wing. The Senate is concerned you are mishandling their assets. Open the docking bay. I do not have time for your incompetence." There was a long, agonizing pause. Juno stopped spinning his data spike. Silas kept his hand near the throttle, ready to punch it. Then, Krell bowed his head slightly. "Apologies. Auditor, Docking Bay 3 is open. Welcome to the oubliette." The screen went black. Juno let out a long, shaky breath. "Remind me never to make you angry. Lyra, you are terrifying." Lyra turned from the console. Her hands were shaking just slightly, but she hid them behind her back. "Stay with the ship. Silas, keep the engines hot." "Juno, you are with me as my adjutant. Try to look bureaucratic and uninteresting." "I am always interesting," Juno protested, smoothing his velvet coat which he had somehow made look like a uniform. "Not today," Lyra said. "Today, we are the Senate, and we are here to collect our property." The interior of the oubliette was cold enough to see their breath. The walls were lined with damp containment cells, and the air smelled of ozone and antiseptic masking the underlying scent of blood. Lyra walked with a purposeful stride, her heels clicking on the metal grating. Juno walked a step behind her, clutching a data pad that was actively hacking the local security nodes as they passed them. Krell met them at the airlock, flanked by 4 heavy security droids. "I must insist on seeing your credentials," Krell said, his eyes narrowing as he took in Juno's eccentric appearance. Lyra didn't break stride. She projected a holographic ident chip from her wrist directly into Krell's face. "Scan it. Then take me to the apex chamber." Krell blinked, startled by the command. "The apex chamber? That is a restricted biolab. Auditor. No one enters without direct clearance from Commander Vale or the Helix Guild. I am the clearance. Lyra lied smoothly. We have intercepted communications suggesting that the asset known as KL-7 is being destabilized prematurely. If that asset dies or loses cognitive coherence before the scheduled event, the loss in investment will be in the billions. I am here to verify the asset's condition. Krell looked at the hologram, then at Lyra. The sheer weight of the money she mentioned seemed to sway him. In the Senate, money was the only god that mattered. This way. Krell grunted. They descended into the bowels of the station. The architecture became more oppressive, the shadows longer. They passed labs filled with bubbling tanks and screaming creatures that Lyra forced herself not to look at. Her focus was singular. She could feel the bond tugging at her, a frantic, chaotic pulse in the back of her mind. It felt like a scream submerged in water. We are close, she whispered to Juno. They reached a massive blast door guarded by 2 elite soldiers. Krell swiped his hand across a sensor, and the doors groaned open. The room beyond was a circular observation theater looking down into a reinforced glass pit. Lyra walked to the edge of the glass and looked down. Her heart stopped. Kyle was strapped to a vertical surgical table in the center of the pit. He was stripped to the waist, his body wired with dozens of electrodes. Tubes were snake-locked into his veins, pumping a glowing, viscous red fluid into his system. He was thrashing, not with human struggles, but with the violent, jerking spasms of a creature being torn apart from the inside. His skin was flushing a deep, angry crimson. His muscles were bulging, tearing, and reknitting in seconds. The sound coming from the pit was a low, continuous roar of agony. "What are you doing to him?" Lyra asked, her voice trembling with a rage she could barely contain. Krell checked a monitor, inducing the apex state. "Auditor. We are flooding his system with synthetic adrenaline and aggression inhibitor blockers. We need to break the cognitive barriers. He is fighting it, though. Remarkably resilient. Most subjects would have turned into mindless berserkers hours ago. He is holding on to something." Lyra gripped the railing. She knew what he was holding on to. "Open the chamber," she ordered. Krell laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "Absolutely not. If I open that glass, the radiation alone would kill you, and if it didn't, he would. He is not a man anymore. Auditor. He is a biological warhead about to detonate." Lyra turned to Juno. "Now." Juno tapped his datapad. The lights in the observation deck died. The emergency sirens began to wail. "System failure," Juno announced cheerfully. "Security grid is rebooting. Oops." In the confusion, Lyra drew a concealed stun baton from her sleeve and drove it into Krell's neck. The warden dropped without a sound. Juno pulled a heavy blaster from under his coat and leveled it at the guards. "Nobody move, or I will reprogram the environmental systems to vent the oxygen. And I am very good at math, so do not test me." The guards froze. Lyra didn't wait. She ran to the control console. She didn't know the codes, but she didn't need to. She smashed the glass cover of the emergency override and pulled the manual release lever. The heavy glass wall separating the observation deck from the pit hissed and began to retract. "Lyra!" Juno shouted. "The chemical levels in there are toxic." Lyra ignored him. She jumped down into the pit, a drop of 3 meters, landing hard on the grate floor. The heat hit her instantly. It was radiating off Kale like a furnace. She ran to the table. Up close, he was terrifying. His veins stood out like black cords against his skin. His teeth had lengthened into fangs that were currently biting into his own lip, drawing blood. His eyes were wide open, but they were entirely red. No white, no iris, just blood and fire. He roared at her, straining against the restraints. It was a sound of pure murder. "Kyle!" she screamed over the sirens. He didn't recognize her. He snapped his jaws at her, thrashing so hard the metal table groaned. The apex state was taking over. The monster was in the driver's seat. Lyra reached out, grabbing his face with both hands. His skin burned her palms. "Look at me. It is Lyra!" Kale's head whipped back and forth. He was lost in a hallucination of violence. "Kill, kill, kill," he rasped, the voice distorted and demonic. Lyra didn't pull back. She pressed her forehead against his burning skin, ignoring the terrifying growls emanating from his chest. "You are not a weapon," she said, her voice fierce and clear. "You are Kyle. You are the man who saved me on Veyron. You are the man who refused to kill on the asteroid." She forced him to look at her, staring into the abyss of his red eyes. "Remember the vow, Kyle. Partnership. Choice. You choose. Do not let them make you this. Choose me." For a moment, nothing happened. The red fluid continued to pump into his veins. The monster continued to roar. Then, Lyra felt it, a flicker in the bond, a tiny, desperate spark of recognition. She poured everything she had into that spark. Her love, her fear, her absolute belief in him. She projected the memory of the starlit loft, the feeling of his hand in hers, the quiet promise of a future. "Come back to me," she whispered. Kale's body went rigid. He let out a scream that sounded like glass shattering. The red in his eyes began to recede, retreating like a tide. A ring of gold amber appeared in the center of the crimson, then another. "Lyra?" he croaked. It sounded like his throat was filled with gravel, but it was him. "I am here," she sobbed. "I am here." Kale looked at her, clarity fighting through the chemical haze. He saw the tears on her face. He saw the danger she was in. "Get me out," he gritted. Lyra scrambled to the restraints. She fumbled with the magnetic locks. They disengaged with a heavy clank. Kale fell forward, collapsing into her arms. He was heavy, impossibly hot, and slick with sweat and blood. But he was hers. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling sharply. The scent of her, the reality of her, was the antidote. It anchored him. The rage that had been threatening to consume his mind hit the wall of his devotion to her and shattered. He wrapped his arms around her, crushing her to him. It wasn't gentle. It was the desperate embrace of a drowning man finding air. Lyra held him just as tightly, her fingers digging into the muscle of his back. "I got you," she whispered. "I got you." Kyle pulled back slightly to look at her. His eyes were amber again, burning with a fierce, possessive intensity. He touched her face, smearing a little of his blood on her cheek, but neither of them cared. "You came for me," he said, wonder and disbelief warring in his voice. "Into the dark." "Always," Lyra said. He kissed her. It was a kiss that tasted of iron and salt and survival. It was urgent, demanding confirmation of life. For a moment, amidst the wailing sirens and the flashing emergency lights, they were the only two things in the universe. The intimacy was absolute, a shared breath that said, "We are alive, we are together, and nothing else matters." A blaster bolt struck the wall next to them, showering them in sparks. "Break it up! Lovebirds!" Juno yelled from the observation deck. "We have company!" Kale broke the kiss. He turned toward the door, and Lyra saw the shift. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by a cold, terrifying competence. "Can you move?" Lyra asked. Kale ripped the IV tubes out of his arms. He flexed his hands, and his claws extended, long, black, and lethal. "I can move," he growled. He grabbed Lyra and tossed her up to the observation deck as if she weighed nothing, then leaped up after her in a blur of motion. Krell was starting to stir on the floor. Kale stepped over him. pausing only for a second. No, the wolf wanted to crush Krell's skull. The wolf wanted to paint the walls with him. But Lyra was watching. Kyle stepped past the warden. "Let us go," he said. The escape was a blur of chaotic violence. Kale was a force of nature, even weakened. The residual apex chemicals in his system made him faster and stronger than he had ever been. He didn't use guns. He used the environment. He tore pipes from the walls to use as clubs. He threw containment barrels to block corridors. Silas brought the Mercy in for a hot extraction, blasting the hangar doors open with the ship's cannons. They sprinted up the ramp, laser fire scorching the hull around them. As the airlock cycled shut, Kale collapsed against the bulkhead, sliding down to the floor. Lyra was there instantly, ripping open a med kit. "Juno, get us out of here!" she shouted. "Hold on to something!" Silas roared from the cockpit. The ship lurched as the jump drives engaged. The stars stretched into lines and the oubliette vanished behind them. They were safe. Lyra began to clean the wounds on Kale's chest. He watched her, his eyes heavy-lidded but soft. "You are insane," he murmured, breaking into a dread prison. "You could have died." "I had a good team," Lyra said, her hands steady despite the adrenaline crash. Juno walked into the medical bay. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't making jokes. He looked pale, the kind of pale that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with horror. "Turn on the comms," Juno said quietly. "What?" Lyra asked, looking up. "Just turn on the news feeds. Now!" Lyra stood up and walked to the wall monitor. She tapped the screen. The image that filled the display was a nightmare. It was shaky footage, clearly taken from a security camera. It showed a colony square, market stalls, a fountain, children playing. The timestamp was from 1 hour ago. Suddenly, a figure blurred into the frame. It was Kale. Or rather, it was a perfect duplicate of Kale in his apex form. The monster on the screen was roaring, eyes glowing red. It tore through the crowd. It overturned stalls. It struck down civilians with brutal, mindless ferocity. Lyra watched in frozen horror as the Kale on the screen threw a vehicle into a building, causing it to collapse. The feed cut to a news anchor. She was weeping. "We are receiving confirmed reports of a massacre at the Aegis 4 colony," the anchor said, her voice breaking. 3,000 confirmed dead. The attacker has been identified as the rogue biological weapon, Kale 7. The screen flashed Kale's face again, superimposed over burning ruins. "The Senate has declared a galaxy-wide state of emergency. All systems are ordered to open fire on sight. There is no trial. There is no containment. This is an extermination order." Lyra stared at the screen. "It is a lie," she whispered. "He was with us. He was in the prison." "The timestamps match our escape," Juno said grimly. "While we were breaking him out, they were releasing the fake footage. They knew we would come for him. They used the rescue as the cover for the frame-up." Lyra turned to look at Kale. He was sitting on the floor, staring at the screen. He watched the monster that wore his face slaughter a family. He watched the fires burn. He didn't scream. He didn't rage. He went completely, terrifyingly still. Lyra ran to him. "Kyle, that is not you. The galaxy will know the truth. We have the data from the archive. We can prove it." Kyle stood up. He moved slowly, like a machine that had been switched to a new setting. He walked to the screen and placed his hand on the image of the burning colony. "They killed 3,000 people," he said. His voice was devoid of inflection. It was a flat, dead thing. "They killed them just to paint a target on my back." Lyra grabbed his arm. "We will fix this. We will find a way." Kyle looked down at her. The warmth she had seen in the cell was gone. The amber in his eyes had hardened into gold coins, cold and metallic. There is no fixing this. Lyra, you cannot debate with a massacre. You cannot negotiate with people who burn worlds to keep a secret. He gently removed her hand from his arm. You wanted a partner. Lyra, you wanted a man who chooses. He walked to the weapons locker on the wall. He opened it and took out a heavy pulse rifle and a bandolier of grenades. He began to strap them on with methodical precision. I am choosing, he said. Kale. What are you doing? Lyra asked, fear rising in her throat. I tried it your way, Kale said. I tried to be the guardian. I tried to be the man. And because of that, 3,000 innocents are ash. He turned to face the room. He looked at Silas, at Juno, and finally at Lyra. He looked like a king of ruins. The Senate wants a monster? Fine, I will give them one. He primed the rifle, the sound loud in the quiet ship. They called me a legend. They called me the darkness. He walked to the viewport and looked out at the infinite, hostile blackness of space. I am going to become a shadow so terrifying that every senator, every guildmaster, every conspirator who signed that order will never sleep again. I will not just kill them. I will dismantle their world, piece by piece, until they are begging for the mercy of a quick death. He looked back at Lyra, his face a mask of beautiful, terrible vengeance. And I will not stop until the only thing left of their conspiracy is the silence of a graveyard. The legend of Kale 7 did not spread through official news channels. It spread through the static between frequencies, through encrypted bursts on smuggler networks, and in the terrified whispers of the Senate's elite. They called him the Black Star Wolf. He was a ghost who struck without warning. In the 3 weeks since the massacre at Aegis 4, 12 major supply depots belonging to the Helix Guild had been reduced to slag. 3 propaganda data centers broadcasting the Senate's lies had gone dark, their servers melted by precision thermal charges. A covert munitions factory on a frozen moon had simply ceased to exist, its foundations shattered by a geothermic overload. There were no casualties in these strikes. That was the detail that terrified the Senate the most. A mindless beast killed randomly, a strategic genius dismantled systems. On the bridge of the Mercy, Lyra Voss watched the galaxy burn, one surgical strike at a time. She stood before the holographic map, watching a red marker blink out of existence in the mid-rim. Another guild asset destroyed. You are pushing too hard, Lyra said to the shadows in the corner of the bridge. Kale emerged from the darkness. He wore black tactical armor now, scuffed and scorched from his last EVA raid. He looked less like a bodyguard and more like a war god carved from obsidian. They are slow to learn, Kyle said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the deck plates. I am teaching them. Lyra turned to face him. His eyes were amber, but they were hard, lacking the warmth they used to hold when he looked at her. You are not teaching them. Kyle, you are terrifying them. And while fear is a useful tool, it is a poor foundation for justice. Kale stopped cleaning his gauntlets and looked up. Justice is a luxury for people who are not being hunted by an armada. Lyra, we are at war. We are trying to stop a war, Lyra countered, stepping closer to him. The legend you are building, this Black Star Wolf, it is swallowing you. I hear the crews in the docking ports. They do not talk about Kale, the man who saved me. They talk about a demon who walks through walls. If you become the monster they painted you as, even to save me, then they have won. Kale stood up. The sheer size of him was overwhelming in the cramped space, but Lyra did not flinch. I do not care if they win the moral argument. Lyra, as long as you are alive to write the history books. He walked past her to the pilot station, where Silas was monitoring the long-range sensors. "Time to target?" Kyle asked. Silas adjusted his cybernetic eye, the aperture clicking softly. "We are approaching the outer ruins of the umbral spine. But we have company. 3 pursuit cruisers, Senate markings. They are hurting us." "They are not hurting us," Kyle said, staring at the screen. "They are chasing a ghost. Take us into the debris field." The umbral spine was not a planet. It was a grave. It was a massive lattice of ancient, stellar-scale technology, a skeletal structure the size of a solar system that drifted in the void. It was a relic of a civilization that had vanished 1,000,000 years ago, leaving behind engines that could move stars and temples that could read minds. The Mercy shuddered as it wove through the field of shattered megastructures that orbited the spine, giant rings of rusted metal, some as large as continents, floated in the silence. Lyra held onto the navigation console. "We need to find the central node," she said. "The map from the Hunter's data case points to a structure called the Temple of Echoes. That is where the Senate plans to trigger the device." Juno Rake was sitting at the comm station. He had been unusually quiet for days. His velvet coat was rumpled, and he had stopped juggling his knives. "We cannot just fly in there," Juno said, his voice tight. "The inner perimeter is protected by an incomprehensible encryption key. It is old tech, pre-Senate. If we try to breach it without the handshake protocol, the automated defenses will turn this ship into confetti." Lyra looked at him. "You sound very sure of that." "Juno." Juno didn't look at her. He stared at his hands. "I am sure because I wrote the patch code for the outer layer." The silence on the bridge was sudden and absolute. Even the hum of the engine seemed to die away. Kale turned slowly. His movement was predatory, fluid and lethal. "Explain," Kale said. The word was not a request. Juno swallowed hard. He looked up, his face pale. 5 years ago, before I was a broker on Karos, I was a cryptographic architect for the core systems. I was young, arrogant, and I wanted to be important. A faction of the Senate hired me to decrypt a relic they found, a key to the umbral spine. He looked at Lyra, his eyes pleading. I didn't know what it was for. Lyra, I thought it was an archaeological project, energy research. By the time I realized they were weaponizing it, I was in too deep. I ran. I hid on Karos. I tried to forget. Kale moved. He crossed the bridge in a single stride. He grabbed Juno by the lapels of his coat and slammed him against the bulkhead. Juno's feet dangled 6 inches off the floor. "You worked for them," Kale snarled. His eyes flared a brilliant, angry gold. "You helped them unlock the door to this weapon. I didn't know." Juno gasped, clawing at Kale's iron grip. "You knew enough to run," Kale roared. "You knew enough to hide, and you have been on this ship, eating our food, pretending to be a friend, while carrying the keys to the genocide they are planning." Kale's free hand clenched into a fist. The veins in his arm bulged. The wolf was surfacing, demanding blood for the betrayal. "Kale!" Lyra's voice cracked like a whip. Kale froze, his fist inches from Juno's face. He turned his head to look at her, his expression a rictus of fury. "He is one of them. Lyra. He is the reason we are here. He is the reason 3,000 people died on Aegis 4. If he had spoken up sooner..." "Put him down," Lyra commanded. "He deserves to die." "And who are you to decide that?" Lyra shouted back. "Are you the executioner now? Is that what the Black Star Wolf is? A judge who murders unarmed men in a hallway?" She walked up to him, placing her hand on his chest right over his heart. She could feel it hammering against his ribs, a frantic, thundering rhythm. "Look at me, Kale. This is the test. This is the moment where you choose. If you kill him for his past, for a mistake he made when he was a fool, then you are no better than Sarek Vale. Sarek kills for convenience. He kills to tidy up loose ends. She squeezed the fabric of his tactical suit. Do not become Sarek. Do not let the Senate turn you into a killer of friends. Kale stared at her. He breathed heavily, the sound harsh in the quiet bridge. He looked at Juno, who was trembling, eyes squeezed shut, waiting for the blow. Then, he looked back at Lyra. The gold in his eyes softened, dimming back to brown. He released his grip. Juno slid down the wall, collapsing into a heap, gasping for air. Kyle stepped back, shaking his hand as if he had touched something vile. He has the codes, Kyle said, his voice flat. Get them, and then keep him out of my sight. Lyra knelt beside Juno. Are you all right? Juno nodded, rubbing his throat. He looked at Kale's back with a mix of terror and shame. I have the codes. Lyra, I can get us through the perimeter. Then do it, Lyra said. And Juno? He looked at her. Make it count. The Temple of Echoes was not a building. It was a living organism made of metal and light. It floated in the center of the spine, a massive crystalline spire that pulsed with a slow, rhythmic beat. As the Mercy docked with the outer ring, Lyra felt a strange sensation wash over her. It was like a static charge on her skin, but internal, a pressure in her mind. The ship is reacting to us, Juno warned as they geared up in the airlock. The logs I decoded said the temple uses psycho-reactive architecture. It responds to intent. If you go in there looking for a fight, the walls will crush you. If you go in afraid, the floor will open up. So we have to be calm, Lyra said, checking the charge on her stun baton. We have to be zen, Juno corrected, which might be a problem for the walking ball of rage over there. He gestured to Kale, who was checking his weapons with mechanical precision. Kale ignored him. I can control it, Kale said. They moved into the temple. The interior was vast, with vaulted ceilings that seemed to shift and breathe. The walls were made of a translucent material that glowed with shifting colors, soft blues and pinks that swirled like oil on water. But as they walked deeper, the colors darkened. When Kale passed a pillar, the light turned a bruised purple. When he gripped his rifle tighter, the corridor narrowed, the walls physically pressing in. Kale, Lyra whispered, you are influencing the geometry. You need to relax. I am walking into a trap. Lyra, relaxing is not in my programming. They reached a central atrium. In the center stood a massive console of obsidian, humming with power. Lyra approached it, Juno flanking her to bypass the locks. This is it, Lyra said. The central control node for the umbral spine. She accessed the data stream. As the information flooded her datapad, her eyes widened. Oh God. What is it? Kale asked, watching the shadows. It is not a weapon, Lyra said, reading the scrolling text. At least, not a kinetic one. The Senate isn't trying to blow up planets. They are trying to turn them off. She projected the schematic into the air. The umbral spine controls the hyperspace energy lattice for this entire sector. It regulates the flow of Tibanna particles that power everything from starships to planetary heating grids. They are going to create a famine, Juno realized, his voice horrified. An energy famine. Exactly, Lyra said. They trigger the spine to dampen the flow. Planets will freeze, trade will stop, shields will fail. The outer rim will be plunged into a dark age overnight, and then the Senate arrives. Kale finished, with their stockpiles, with their relief fleets. They offer protection contracts. Lyra said, in exchange for total loyalty and permanent militarization. They create the problem so they can sell the solution. It is the ultimate racketeering scheme. They are not just unifying the galaxy, Lyra whispered. They are enslaving it. A low rumble shook the floor. The walls of the temple shifted from blue to an angry, pulsing red. They are here, Kale said. He turned toward the massive archway they had entered through. The architecture is reacting to them. Hostile intent. Lyra grabbed Kale's arm. We need to broadcast this. I have the evidence. If I can patch it into the spine's communication array, I can boost the signal to every receiver in the galaxy. They cannot hide an energy famine if everyone knows it is coming. How long? Kyle asked. 10 minutes, Juno said, typing furiously on the console. Maybe 15. The encryption is heavy. Kyle nodded. He looked at Lyra. You get the truth out. I will buy you 15 minutes. He started to walk away. Kyle, wait. Lyra ran to him. She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. Do not do this alone. We fight together. That was the deal. Kale covered her hands with his own. His gloves were cold, but his touch was gentle. This is the partnership. Lyra. You fight the lie, I fight the liars, now you are the light. I am the shadow that protects it. He leaned down and kissed her. It was brief, hard, and desperate. I am not losing you to idealism, Lyra. And I am not losing you to vengeance, she whispered back. They separated. The bond between them stretched, taut and painful, but it held. It was a lifeline in the dark. Kale walked to the archway. He stood in the center of the hall, a lone figure against the shifting organic light of the temple. He took a deep breath, centering himself. The red walls stopped pulsing and settled into a steady, ominous amber. The enemy arrived. It wasn't a squad. It was a battalion. Armored troopers flooded into the atrium, their boots clamoring on the stone. Drones buzzed overhead, and walking through the center of them, flanked by elite Praetorian guards, was Sarek Vale. He looked impeccable, not a hair out of place. He looked at Kale with a sneer of intellectual superiority. The dog returns to its vomit, Sarek said, his voice amplified by the temple's acoustics. I knew you would come here. It is the only place left to run. Kale did not raise his weapon. He stood with his arms loose at his sides. We are not running. Sarek laughed. He signaled his troops to hold fire. He wanted to savor this. You have caused quite a mess. Wolf, the destruction of the depots, the supply lines, annoying, but ultimately pointless. We have more depots. We have more supplies. You are fighting a Hydra. I am not trying to kill the Hydra, Kale said softly. I am just keeping it busy. Sarek's eyes narrowed. He looked past Kale, to the console where Lyra and Juno were working. The diplomat. Still trying to talk her way out of an execution? Sarek stepped forward. It does not matter what she finds. Kale, do you think the galaxy cares about truth? They care about safety. They care about warmth. When we turn off the lights, they will not ask who dimmed the switch. They will only kiss the hand that holds the candle. He smiled, a cruel, thin thing. That is why I ordered the massacre at Aegis 4. Fear is the only currency that never inflates. I unified the core worlds in a single afternoon. 3,000 dead. A rounding error, a small price for order. Lyra heard him. Her fingers flew across the console. Did you get that? She hissed to Juno. Recorded, Juno whispered, sweat dripping from his nose. Audio is clean. I am patching it into the broadcast buffer. Sarek looked back at Kale. Surrender. We will make it quick. Kale smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of the wolf when the trap snaps shut, not on its leg, but on the hunter's throat. You want the legend? Kale asked. You want the Black Star Wolf? He rolled his shoulders. The air around him began to distort. The temple walls screamed, shifting from amber to a blinding, violent black. The temple is reacting to him, a trooper shouted, backing away. Kale stepped forward, more then come and take him. Sarek's face lost its composure. Kill him! The battalion opened fire. Kale moved. He didn't run for cover. He ran into the fire. He moved with a speed that defied biology. He slid under a volley of plasma bolts, coming up inside the guard of the first trooper. He didn't use his gun. He used the trooper. He grabbed the man by the armor and threw him into the squad behind him. He was a blur of violence. He wove through the chaos, drawing every eye, every gun, every ounce of attention to himself. Focus on me, he roared, his voice merging with the shriek of the temple. Look at the monster, he was taking hits. Armor plating shattered and blood sprayed, but he didn't stop. He was the lightning rod. Lyra watched him from the console, her heart breaking with every blow he took. But she didn't look away. She didn't stop typing. He was buying her time. He was spending his life, second by second, to give her the chance to save the world. Ready? Juno shouted. The array is aligned. Lyra slammed her hand onto the activation key. The console hummed. A beam of pure energy shot up from the center of the temple, piercing the roof and blasting into the void. It hit the umbral spine's amplifier node. And then, the signal went out. To every HoloNet receiver, to every datapad, to every ship in the sector. Sarek's voice, clear and undeniable, echoed across the stars. I ordered the massacre at Aegis 4. Fear is the only currency. In the atrium, the troopers faltered. They heard the voice. They heard their commander confessing to the slaughter of their own citizens. Sarek froze. He looked at his wrist comp, hearing the broadcast. His face went white. Stop the transmission, Sarek screamed, losing all control. Destroy the console. He raised his own weapon, aiming it past Kyle, directly at Lyra. Kale saw it. He was surrounded. He was bleeding from a dozen wounds. But he saw the gun aimed at Lyra. The apex trigger didn't activate. The chemicals were gone. This was just Kale. He lunged, ignoring the soldiers, ignoring the pain. He threw himself into the line of fire. Not this time. He snarled. He took the shot meant for her. It hit his shoulder, spinning him around. But he didn't fall. He stood his ground, a wall of black armor and unyielding will. He looked at Sarek, and for the first time, the commander looked afraid, because he wasn't looking at a political prisoner. He wasn't looking at a science experiment. He was looking at the legend. And the legend was angry. The umbral spine was no longer silent. The massive stellar lattice, a structure so large it dwarfed the moons orbiting it, was singing. It was a deep, resonant vibration that rattled the bones of every soldier and rebel within the Temple of Echoes. The psycho-reactive architecture had shifted from the angry amber of warning to a turbulent, bruised violet. The temple was feeding on the conflict, amplifying the tension until the air itself felt heavy enough to crush a lung. In the center of the atrium, Kale 7 was moving like a storm front. He was the lightning rod, he was the distraction, and he was magnificent. A squad of elite Praetorian guards, the Senate's most heavily modified soldiers, surrounded him. They wore armor that could deflect tank shells and carried plasma lances designed to melt starship hulls. Against any other opponent, they would have been a firing squad. Against Kale, they were clumsy children trying to catch smoke. Kale ducked under a swinging plasma lance, the heat singing the hair on his arm. He didn't strike back with lethal force. He didn't tear the soldier's throat out, though the wolf inside him screamed for the hot salt of blood. Instead, Kale spun, driving his elbow into the servo joint of the soldier's armor. There was a sickening crunch of metal, and the suit locked up. The soldier fell, immobilized but alive. Stay down, Kyle growled. He vaulted over the fallen man, kicking a second soldier in the chest plate, sending him flying into a pillar. 3 weeks ago, Kale would have left a pile of corpses and he would have painted the walls with them to send a message. But Lyra was watching. She was 50 meters away, crouched behind the obsidian console with Juno, fighting a war of code and truth. Kale could feel her presence in the back of his mind, a steady, luminous beacon cutting through the red haze of his combat instincts. "Do not become the monster," her voice whispered in the bond. "Show them the man." Kale gritted his teeth and caught a vibroblade between his armored palms. He twisted, snapping the blade, and headbutted the attacker with controlled precision. Unconscious. Not dead. From the high balcony overlooking the atrium, Commander Sarek Vale watched the display with growing frustration. He gripped the railing, his knuckles white. "Why is he not killing them?" Sarek hissed. "He is an apex predator. He should be slaughtering them." Next to him, a tactical officer looked at a data pad. "Sir, his vitals are stable. He is not entering the apex state. He is fighting with surgical restraint. The psychological profile suggests he is holding back." Sarek slammed his fist onto the railing. "He is mocking us. He is dismantling my best men like they are training dummies. He wants to show the galaxy that he is better than us." Sarek looked down at the console where Lyra was working. The central beam of the temple was pulsing brighter, turning a blinding white. "They are accessing the central broadcast node," the officer warned. "If they breach the encryption, they can override every signal in the quadrant." Sarek's face hardened into a mask of cold, bureaucratic cruelty. He reached into his tunic and pulled out a small, flat device. It was not a weapon, but a remote access key. "He thinks he has a choice," Sarek said softly. "He thinks he can evolve. Let us remind him that he is property." Sarek keyed in a sequence of numbers. "Activate the Omega protocol. Trigger the kill switch. At the console." Lyra's fingers were a blur. "Juno, talk to me," she shouted over the roar of plasma fire. "I am through the second firewall," Juno yelled back, his eyes wide with panic as a stray bolt scorched the stone inches from his head. "But the third layer is biological. It requires a retinal handshake from a Senate High Chancellor." "We do not have a High Chancellor," Lyra said, accessing the stolen data spike from the archive. "But we have their financial records. We have the bribe ledgers. I can spoof the clearance by flooding the system with their own transaction codes. It is risky. Lyra, if the system rejects it, the feedback loop will melt this console and us along with it." "Do it," Lyra commanded. She looked up, across the hall. Kyle was fighting 3 men at once. He moved with a grace that made her heart ache. He was protecting them. He was keeping the chaos focused on him so she could work. Suddenly, Kale froze. It wasn't a hesitation. It was a seizure. He arched his back, a guttural scream tearing from his throat that silenced the battlefield. He dropped to his knees, clutching his chest. "Kale!" Lyra screamed. Sarek stood on the balcony, the remote in his hand glowing red. The Omega protocol was not a simple explosive. It was far crueler. It sent a neurosynaptic shock directly into the brainstem, simulating the pain of being burned alive while simultaneously flooding the amygdala with chemical terror. It was designed to break the mind, to shatter the ego and force the subject into a feral, defensive psychosis. Kale clawed at his own head, his vision fractured. The temple dissolved into a kaleidoscope of agony. The beacon of Lyra's presence in his mind was being drowned out by a tsunami of white noise. "Kill them," the chemicals screamed. "Kill them all before they kill you. Survive, destroy, hunt." His eyes rolled back. The amber gold was swallowed by blood red. His muscles began to spasm. bulging as the apex biological override tried to force a transformation. Lyra saw him falling apart. She felt the bond fracture, the sudden coldness of his mind retreating into madness. "He is hurting him," Lyra shouted. "Juno, the broadcast, now! I am trying." Juno shrieked, "It is processing." Lyra didn't wait. She grabbed the microphone attached to the console. It wasn't live yet, but the buffer was recording. She looked up at Sarek, her eyes burning with hatred. "You want to show, Sarek? You want to show the galaxy what you made?" She hit the override key. "Upload the archive data, all of it. The massacre footage, the blueprints, the financial ledgers, and open the live feed." Juno slammed his hand onto the enter key, bypassing security. "We are live." A beam of light shot from the temple, piercing the roof of the umbral spine. It hit the relay satellites and exploded outward, riding the hyperspace lanes. In the atrium, every soldier's helmet display flickered. Every data pad lit up. Above them, a massive holographic projection materialized in the air. It wasn't Kale. It was Lyra, citizens of the galaxy. Lyra's voice boomed, magnified by the temple and broadcast to 1,000 worlds. "My name is Lyra Voss. You have been told that we are at war with a monster. You have been told that the astral wolf is a threat to your safety." On the screen, the footage changed. It showed the staged massacre at Aegis 4. But this time, it showed the side-by-side comparison. The real Kale, locked in the prison cell. The fake Kale, slaughtering civilians. It showed the timestamp discrepancies. It showed the transfer of funds from Sarek's account to the mercenary guild that staged the attack. "You were lied to," Lyra continued, her voice steady and steel-hard. "The Senate created the hunger you are feeling. They engineered the energy crisis, and they created a villain to distract you while they sold you the cure." In the atrium, the Praetorian guards lowered their weapons. They looked at the hologram. They looked at the data scrolling on their internal displays, proof that their own paychecks were funded by the same accounts that paid for the massacre. "It's a lie!" Sarek screamed from the balcony. "Jam the signal! Kill them!" But no one moved. The soldiers looked at their commander, then at the man writhing on the floor in agony. Lyra turned her attention to Kale. She ignored the soldiers. She ignored the politics. She ran from the console, sprinting across the open ground. "Lyra, no!" Juno shouted. "He is in Apex. He will tear you apart." Lyra didn't stop. She slid to her knees beside Kale. He was unrecognizable. His face was contorted, his teeth bared in a snarl. He lashed out blindly, his clawed hand catching her shoulder, tearing the fabric of her uniform and drawing blood. Lyra gasped, but she didn't pull away. She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. "Kale, look at me," he roared at her, a sound of pure, terrified aggression. The kill switch was burning his mind. He didn't see Lyra. He saw a threat. He raised his hand to strike, to end the source of the pain. Lyra pressed her forehead against his. She didn't use strength. She used the bond. She opened her mind completely, letting down every barrier, flooding him with not just love, but shared pain. She let him feel her fear, her hope, and her absolute refusal to let him go. "I am here," she projected into the storm of his mind. "I am here. I am the anchor." Kale's hand froze inches from her throat. The red in his eyes trembled. The voice, he thought, the starlight, deep in the neurochemical fire. Kale found a thread. It was thin, frayed, and burning. But it was there. It was the promise he had made in the archive. "I will leave a light on for you." He grabbed the thread. He held onto it with the desperation of a man falling into a black hole. He fought the pain. He fought the programming. He fought the kill switch that was telling him to kill the woman he loved. Kyle let out a sob that sounded like a breaking bone. Lyra. He gasped. The red receded. The amber returned, dim and agonized, but present. Make it stop. Lyra looked up at the balcony. Sarek was frantically trying to input a new code, realizing his troops were standing down. She stood up. She helped Kale to his feet. He was shaking, his body ravaged by the seizure, but he stood. Finish it, Lyra whispered to him. Not as the monster, as the partner. Kyle looked at Sarek. The pain was still there, a white-hot spike in his skull, but he channeled it. He took all the agony, all the rage, and he compressed it into a single cold point of focus. He leapt. He cleared the 50 feet to the balcony in a single bound, landing with a heavy thud that cracked the stone. Sarek stumbled back, dropping the remote. He reached for his sidearm, but Kale was already there. Kale grabbed the gun and crushed it in his hand. He grabbed Sarek by the throat and lifted him off the ground, dangling him over the railing. The soldiers below raised their rifles, but they didn't fire. They watched. The galaxy watched. The live feed was still running, broadcasting the confrontation to billions of viewers. Do it, Sarek choked out, his face turning purple. Kill me. Prove you are the beast. Make me a martyr. Kale's claws dug into Sarek's skin. A droplet of blood ran down his hand. The urge was there. It was so sweet, so easy. Just one squeeze, just one twitch of his muscle, and the architect of his pain would be gone. The apex whispered, "He deserves it. Break him." Kale looked down at Lyra. She was standing in the atrium, watching him. She wasn't afraid. She was nodding. Kale looked back at Sarek. "No," Kale said. His voice was rough, like grinding stones. "You are not a martyr, Sarek. You are just a criminal, and criminals do not get a warrior's death. They get a trial." He threw Sarek back onto the balcony floor. "Confess," Kyle commanded. Sarek gasped for air, massaging his throat. He looked at the hovering camera drones. He looked at his own soldiers, who were looking at him with disgust. He realized, with a dawning horror, that death would have been the easier escape. Sarek stammered. "Louder," Kyle growled, stepping closer. "Tell them about the Moonchain Decree. Tell them about the famine." Sarek slumped. The arrogance broke. The political mask shattered. "We did it," Sarek whispered, his voice carried by the audio pickups. "We funded the program. We staged the attacks. We needed control. The galaxy was too fractured. We wanted to unify it through fear." "And the umbral spine?" Kale asked. "We were going to shut down the rim." Sarek wept. "To force them to buy our protection. It was just business." Kale looked at the camera drone. "You heard him?" Kale said to the galaxy. "It was just business." He turned to the Praetorian guards below. "Get him out of my sight." 2 guards moved instantly. They marched up the stairs, grabbed their former commander, and dragged him away in binders. Kale stood alone on the balcony. The adrenaline crashed. The pain from the kill switch lingered, a dull ache in his bones. He leaned against the railing, looking down at Lyra. She smiled. It was a tired, tear-streaked smile, but it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "It is over," she mouthed. The collapse of the conspiracy was not immediate, but it was inevitable. The broadcast from the umbral spine had been the spark. Within hours, the Allied fleets of the Outer Rim had turned their guns on the Senate loyalists. The Moonchain Decree was suspended before the sun set on Veyron Station. Senators who had been named in the archive files were arrested by their own security details, eager to distance themselves from the treason. The galaxy did not heal overnight. Trust had been broken. Systems were wary. But the truth was out, and that was enough to start building. 6 months later, the planet of Orinthia was a garden world on the edge of the wild space. It was a sanctuary, a place where the laws of the core did not reach, and where refugees from the war had found a home. On a cliff overlooking a silver ocean, a new structure had been built. It wasn't a fortress. It was a hall of diplomacy, built from white stone and glass. Lyra stood on the terrace, watching the twin suns set. She wore a simple linen tunic, the heavy robes of the envoy left behind. She heard him before she saw him. Kyle walked out onto the terrace. He moved silently, as always. But the tension that had defined him for so long was gone. He wore civilian clothes, a loose shirt and trousers, though he still carried a knife at his belt. Old habits died hard. "The delegation from the Reptilian Guild is asking for you," Kyle said, leaning against the archway. "They say they will only negotiate the trade routes if the wolf is present to guarantee the terms." Lyra laughed softly, turning to face him. "They are afraid you will bite them if they cheat." "Good," Kyle said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Fear keeps them honest." He walked over to her. He looked different. The scars were still there, and his eyes still held the weight of 80 years of violence, but the haunted look was gone. The amber in his eyes was clear, warm, like aged whiskey. "Are you happy?" he asked suddenly. Lyra looked out at the ocean. "We have a lot of work to do. Kale, the Coalition for Reform is a mess. The refugees need housing. The Senate remnants are still trying to sue us. That is not what I asked," Kale said. He reached out and took her hand. His skin was warm. The bond between them hummed, a low, steady contentment. Lyra looked at him. "I am happy," she said. "I am free. And you?" Kale looked at the horizon. "For 80 years. I was a weapon. Then I was a fugitive. Then I was a legend." He turned his gaze to her. "They still call me that, you know. The Dark Guardian. The Black Star Wolf. I heard a spacer in the port telling a story about how I can catch lightning in my teeth." Lyra smiled, reaching up to touch his face. "Legends are useful, Kale. They inspire people. I do not want to be a legend," Kale said quietly. "Legends are lonely. Legends are statues that people put on pedestals so they do not have to look them in the eye." He stepped closer, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her into the solid reality of his body. "I learned something. Lyra, power without empathy creates monsters. I saw that in Sarek. Love without respect becomes a cage. I felt that in my own fear of losing you. And survival. Survival without meaning is just prolonging the pain." He rested his forehead against hers. "You gave me meaning. You gave me a choice. So what do you want to be? If not a legend?" Lyra whispered. Kale closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of the ocean and the woman who had saved his soul. "I just want to be your partner," he said. Lyra closed her eyes too, holding him tight as the first stars of the evening began to appear in the velvet sky above them. "Then that is what you are," she said. And under the vast, indifferent silence of the galaxy, the wolf and the diplomat stood together, not as myths, but as two people who had walked through the fire and come out the other side, hand in hand.